A black boy named Benjamin finds a lost wallet on his way home and returns it to its owner, an old wealthy man named Mr. Vlad. The next day, a police officer shows up at his door. What could be the reason behind this unexpected visit? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Benjamin Jackson, a black 13-year-old boy, raised his backpack higher on his shoulders as he left school. His fair face was kissed by the warm afternoon sun, and he took a deep breath to enjoy the fresh air. But his day wasn't over yet. He smiled and walked down the path toward his job at the local newspaper company. After school, Benjamin thought about the upcoming school trip as he walked. It was a chance to see all the important buildings in the state capital. He got excited at the thought, but then he thought about how much it would cost. His mom had a hard time making extra money, which is why he took this job in the first place. Benjamin whispered to himself, "I can do this," and pressed on a little faster. Saving, and I'll have enough for the trip. The office of the newspaper could be seen. It was a simple brick house with lots of windows. Benjamin felt proud as he pushed the heavy glass door open. While he walked in, he could smell the familiar smell of ink and paper and hear people talking on the phone. "Hey there, Benjamin," Mrs. Thompson, the front desk worker, said with a smile. "Right on time, as always." Benjamin smiled back. "Hi, Mrs. Thompson. Anything special for me today?" She gave him a bunch of papers. "Just the usual route, sweetie, but Mr. Davis mentioned he might have an extra task for you later." Benjamin happily agreed and went to the back room to organize his papers. He couldn't help but be thankful for the chance as he worked. Making time for school and work wasn't always easy, but he knew it was worth it. His mom worked really hard to feed them and keep the house warm. He had to do something to help out and also follow his own dreams. Benjamin started his run for delivering newspapers. His bag was full of papers. Each paper was carefully put where the customer wanted it, house by house. Some liked them on the porch, others by the mailbox. No matter how small the work seemed, he was proud to do his job well. Benjamin finished up his last delivery just as the sun was going down. A little pain in his arms, but his heart felt good. One more day of work done. One more step toward his goal. After letting out a happy sigh, he went back to the newspaper office, ready to see what extra work Mr. Davis might have for him. After Benjamin's shift at the newspaper, the sky had turned a soft orange color. He said goodbye to Mrs. Thompson with a wave and went outside into the cool evening air. The weight of his school books and the things he had done that day made his backpack feel heavy. "Every crack in the sidewalk felt like an old friend as I walked home." Benjamin's thoughts went to dinner and the task that was waiting for him. But something caught his eye as he turned a corner. A brown leather wallet was lying on the gray concrete. Benjamin stopped what he was doing. He took a quick look, but the street was empty. He bent down and took the wallet from her. He could tell it was heavy in his hands. "Hello?" he called out, hoping the owner was close, but all he heard was the sound of leaves rustling. Benjamin carefully opened the wallet with his hands. When he saw several crisp bills inside, his eyes got really big. A license and a few credit cards were also there. There was a small voice in his head that said, "That money could go a long way towards your school trip fund. It would be so much easier," but Benjamin pushed the thought away as quickly as it came to him. Deep down, he knew it wasn't right. It's likely that someone was really scared about losing their cash. Benjamin thought to himself, "What would Mom say if she knew I even thought about keeping it?" He felt guilty. Benjamin made up his mind after taking a deep breath. He would find the person who should have had the cash. He did the right thing, even though it might mean his own goals would have to wait a little longer. Benjamin carefully put the wallet into his bag with a new sense of purpose. He would figure out a safe way to give it back when he got home. Benjamin could feel a warmth in his chest as he walked on. Doing the right thing wasn't always easy, but it felt great when you did it. Benjamin looked very carefully through the wallet's contents, his brow furrowed in focus. An ID card was found among the crisp bills and credit cards. He looked at the card and saw the name on it. "Mr. Vlad," Benjamin said in a low voice, his face lighting up with recognition. He had heard that name before, but only in whispers around the area. People knew Mr. Vlad as the old, rich man who lived in the big house on Oak Street. People in the area had heard stories about the shy man, but Benjamin had never seen him. Some said he was rude and grumpy, while others said he was just lonely. It felt heavier in Benjamin's hands than it did before as he stood there. In his heart, he knew that going back was the right thing to do. But the thought of talking to the strange Mr. Vlad made him nervous. Benjamin asked out loud, but his voice was hard to make out. "What if he's mean?" He shook his head as he remembered what his mother had told him. "Sweetheart, don't judge a book by its cover." Benjamin decided what to do after taking a deep breath. He was going to give the wallet back in person. It wasn't enough to just do the right thing. He had to face his fears and take responsibility. Benjamin changed his mind and walked in a new direction. His first thought was to go home, but he instead turned toward Mr. Vlad's house on Oak Street. Benjamin tried to cool down by going over what he was going to say in his head as he walked. As Benjamin walked up to the big house in the late afternoon sun, long shadows covered his path. It was bigger than he thought it would be, and the hedges and yard were well taken care of. Benjamin felt small and out of place in his old sneakers and school bag when he saw it. He didn't go back, though. It was important for Benjamin to give back the wallet, not just for Mr. Vlad, but also for himself. Even though it scared him a little, it was a chance to make a difference and do something good. Benjamin's determination grew stronger with each step up the long path. He held on tight to the wallet, ready for whatever was waiting for him behind Mr. Vlad's door. At the base of the big house, Benjamin stood with his mouth open in shock. The house was huge, and the brick walls were worn down and covered in ivy. The place looked great, but there was a sense of neglect about it. Huge trees grew on either side of the doorway, and the paint was peeling off the window frames. Benjamin took a deep breath and walked up the worn-out stone steps to the front door. As he raised his hand to knock, his heart was beating fast. He thought about it for a moment, his fingers just inches from the heavy wooden door. Benjamin thought, "What if he yells at me?" His stomach was turning with worry. He pushed his fear aside, though, and hit the door hard. Then it was quiet. Benjamin moved his feet back and forth, not sure if he should knock again. It was just as he was about to leave that he heard footsteps coming from inside. Mr. Vlad walked in when the door creaked open. He was tall and had blue eyes that looked right through Benjamin. His hair was thin and white. The old man's face was guarded, and his bushy eyebrows were raised in doubt. "Yes?" Mr. Vlad asked. His voice was rough, just like he looked. As Benjamin gulped hard, his mouth went dry. All of a sudden, he spoke slowly and stuttered, "Hello, Mr. Vlad." He held out the wallet with the shaking hand, and said, I found your wallet on the sidewalk and wanted to return it to you." Mr. Vlad looked quickly back and forth between Benjamin's face and the wallet. He slowly reached out and took it, rubbing Benjamin's hand with his worn-out fingers. Mr. Vlad quickly looked inside the wallet. When he opened it, his face got a little less angry, but there was still some doubt in his eyes. He turned around and looked back at Benjamin, studying the boy's worried but sincere face. Benjamin thought it had been very long before Mr. Vlad gave a short nod. He said, "Thank you," and his voice was still rough, but had a hint of warmth to it. "That was honest of you." A wave of relief went through Benjamin as he turned away from Mr. Vlad's big front door. Even though his heart was still beating fast, he felt warm and happy at the same time. It wasn't easy, but he did the right thing. Benjamin thought about what happened as he walked down the broken path. Mr. Vlad's stern personality and intense gaze had been scary, but there was also a hint of surprise, or even admiration behind it. The old man might have had a better day because of Benjamin's small act of kindness. Benjamin smiled to himself. On his way home, Benjamin saw long shadows cast by the setting sun across the quiet streets of the neighborhood. He believed that. He almost kept the wallet because he could use the money for his school trip. But the way he felt now was worth much more than any money. Benjamin thought, maybe if other people saw good people doing good things, they'd want to do it too. The thought made him stand a little taller and walk a little faster. Benjamin could see the warm glow of his simple home's lights as he turned the corner onto his street. He sped up because he was excited to tell his mom about what he had done. He learned about being honest and having ethics from Mrs. Jackson all the time. And she often did so through her actions as well as her words. She worked hard to make Benjamin a good person, just like his sick father. Benjamin ran up to the front door, pushed it open, and yelled, "Mom, you won't believe what happened today." Mrs. Jackson came out of the kitchen with a dish towel to wipe her hands. When she saw how excited her son looked, it made her tired face look better. She asked, with love in her voice, "What is it, sweetie?" Benjamin couldn't wait to tell her that he found Mr. Vlad's wallet and gave it back to him. It meant the world to him to know she would be proud of him. Benjamin walked into the cozy living room all at once, his eyes shining with joy. Mrs. Jackson looked up from the worn-out couch where she was folding laundry. The sight of her excited son made her face relax. Benjamin sat down next to his mother and said, "Mom, you won't believe what happened today." Mrs. Jackson put down the shirt she was folding and focused on Benjamin. She asked, in a sweet, encouraging voice, "What is it, sweetie?" Benjamin took a big breath and began to tell his story. He told her that he found Mr. Vlad's wallet on the ground and was tempted to keep the money for his school trip, but he chose to give it back to its owner. Mrs. Jackson's eyes got teary with pride as Benjamin talked. She reached out and gave him a light squeeze. She said in a soft voice, "Oh, Benjamin, my son. I'm so proud of you." Benjamin got a lump in his throat when his mom said those words. He asked, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, "Really?" Mrs. Jackson gave him a nod and a tight hug. "Really," she said. "Sure, you made the right choice, even when it was hard. That takes real courage and integrity." Benjamin put his face on his mom's shoulder and felt safe and loved. She held his face in her hands when they broke apart, and her eyes were serious but kind. "You know, honey, it's not always easy to do the right thing," she added, "especially when we're struggling ourselves. But honesty and kindness are worth more than any amount of money." Benjamin nodded, because he knew what she was saying meant a lot. He remembered how his mom always worked hard and never whined, even when things were hard. He had learned more from her than from any lesson. "I know, Mom," he said. "I just kept thinking about what you would do. And I knew I couldn't keep the wallet, no matter how much I wanted to." Mrs. Jackson started to cry, and she pulled Benjamin closer again. The bond between mother and son seemed to get stronger at that time. It was based on love, trust, and shared values. The next morning, Benjamin woke up early. The events of the day before were still fresh in his mind. His mom gave him a quick hug before he left the house, ate a bowl of cereal, and got dressed quickly. The cool morning air rubbed his face as he walked to school. Benjamin's mind went back to the wallet and Mr. Vlad. He was interested in what the old man was doing at the moment, and whether he had seen that Benjamin had returned the wallet. Benjamin shook his head and pushed the thought away. A small part of him hoped that Mr. Vlad would reach out and maybe thank him again. That was enough for him. He had done the right thing. Classes and chats with friends made the school day go by quickly. An occasional thought of the big, empty house where Mr. Vlad lived would take Benjamin's attention away. He thought about what it would be like to live by yourself in such a big place. Benjamin rushed to his part-time job at the newspaper company when the school bell rang. He couldn't help but wonder if Mr. Vlad read the local paper. As he sorted through stacks of papers and got ready to make deliveries, He might see Benjamin's name one day and bring good news instead of just lost things back. Benjamin didn't let these thoughts stand in the way of his work, though. He worked hard on each job and was determined to do his best. This job was important, after all. It was helping him save money for the school trip and pay for things for his family. Benjamin was proud of his work and carefully organized the papers and made sure that each delivery was right. Benjamin thought about how his meeting with Mr. Vlad had been fun. But it was only a small part of his busy life. As he worked, he had to pay attention to school, his job, and helping his mom. It was possible to do the right thing with the bag, but now it was time to move on. In the late afternoon, Benjamin was leaving his job at the newspaper when someone knocked on his door out of the blue. The phone was answered by Mrs. Jackson, who had just gotten home from work. Seeing a police officer stand there made her heart skip a beat. "Good afternoon, ma'am," the police officer said. "Is this the Jackson residence?" As Mrs. Jackson nodded, her throat dried up all of a sudden. She asked in worry, "Yes, it is. Is everything okay? I'm here about a matter concerning your son, Benjamin. Is he home?" Mrs. Jackson became more worried. "He's still at work, but he should be home soon." "What's this about? Is Benjamin in trouble?" There was a sound of footsteps coming toward them right then. Benjamin came around the turn with his backpack on one shoulder. When he saw the police officer standing in the hallway, he stopped short. With worry in his voice, Benjamin called out, "Mom? What's going on?" As her son walked up, Mrs. Jackson reached out and pulled him close. "These officers say they need to talk to you, honey." Benjamin's thoughts were going fast. Was there something going on at the newspaper? Was this about the wallet that Mr. Vlad had? When he looked up at the police officers, he felt a knot in his gut. The short cop asked, "Benjamin Jackson? We need to ask you a few questions about something that happened yesterday," the officer said, after Benjamin nodded. Benjamin and Mrs. Jackson looked at each other with worry. The small house they lived in felt tense and heavy all of a sudden. Benjamin's chest hurt as he thought about what might have made the cops come to their door. The police officer said his name was Officer Rivera. As he moved out of the way, a familiar person stood behind him. It was Mr. Vlad, who looked a little uneasy, but resolved. He said, "Hello, Benjamin." But Mr. Vlad's voice was softer. Then Benjamin remembered from the day before, when they had met briefly. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by like this." Benjamin and Mrs. Jackson looked at each other with shock. "Not at all, Mr. Vlad," Benjamin said, sounding both confused and interested. "To properly thank you for returning my wallet." Mr. Vlad cleared his throat and said, "I wanted to find you, but realized I didn't know where you lived. These kind officers offered to help me find you." Officer Rivera said, "Yes." Mr. Vlad came to the station asking for assistance. "We were happy to help, given the circumstances." Mrs. Jackson, who had been listening carefully, put her hand on Benjamin's back to make him feel better. "Thank you very much, Mr. Vlad," she said, with a smile. The edges of Mr. Vlad's eyes wrinkled when he smiled. "Benjamin, what you did yesterday meant more to me than you could know. That wallet contained not just money, but precious memories of my late wife. Your honesty in returning it touched my heart deeply." Benjamin's chest felt warm when Mr. Vlad spoke. He had no idea how important the wallet really was. "I've lived in this neighborhood for years, but I've kept to myself," Mr. Vlad said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your act of kindness made me think of how good people are, especially our youth." Mrs. Jackson gave Benjamin a shoulder squeeze and looked proud in her eyes. The easy thing Benjamin did made him feel like he had a lump in his throat. Benjamin said, "I just did what anyone would do." The man shook his head, though. "No, oi, what you did was special. It's rare to find such integrity these days, and I wanted to thank you personally." Mr. Vlad took a deep breath, and his eyes lit up with fresh determination. "Benjamin, your actions have touched me deeply. They've reminded me of the importance of connection and kindness. I've been thinking about how I can show my appreciation, and I believe I've found a way." Benjamin and Mrs. Jackson were interested and listened carefully. The warm tone in Mr. Vlad's voice said, "I'd like to set up a full scholarship fund for you, Benjamin. This fund will cover your education, all the way through college." Benjamin and Mrs. Jackson thought about what they had just heard for a moment, as the words hung in the air. Benjamin's eyes got really big in shock, and Mrs. Jackson put her hand to her mouth in shock. In a shaky voice, Mrs. Jackson told Mr. Vlad, That's incredibly generous. We don't know what to say." Benjamin just stood there, dumbfounded. He had no idea that giving back a wallet would lead to something so important in his life. His eyes filled with tears as the truth of Mr. Vlad's offer hit him. Benjamin said, I don't know how to thank you," but his voice was far below a whisper. Mr. Vlad gave a small smile. "You already have, my boy. Your honesty and integrity have given me a renewed faith in humanity. This is my way of ensuring that your bright future isn't hindered by financial constraints." Mrs. Jackson, who was very upset, walked up to Mr. Vlad and took his hands in hers. "Mr. Vlad, you have no idea what this means to us. Benjamin has always dreamed of going to college, but we've been worried about how to afford it. It's a miracle." Benjamin wiped his eyes and nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Vlad. I promise I'll make the most of this opportunity. I won't let you down." Benjamin's life began to change in ways he never thought possible after Mr. Vlad's kind offer. In their small town, word of the grant spread quickly, making Benjamin the center of attention very quickly. At school, Benjamin's teachers walked over to him and told him how proud they were. His English teacher, Mrs. Peterson, be on time. She was proud as she talked to him after class. She looked Benjamin in the eyes and said, "Benjamin, I'm so proud of you. Your honesty has truly paid off. You've set a wonderful example for your classmates." Benjamin blushed because he wasn't used to all the praise yet. "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. I was just doing what I thought was right." He got compliments and pats on the back from his friends in the hallways. Some people even asked for his sign, which made Benjamin feel bad. During lunch, Benjamin's friend Tom told him, "Way to go. You're like a local celebrity now." Even with all the new attention, Benjamin stayed grounded. He kept studying because he was determined to make the most of Mr. Vlad's kind gift. He still went to his part-time job at the newspaper company after school, because he wasn't going to let his responsibilities slip. When he got to the newspaper office, his boss, Mr. Jackson, smiled at him. "Benjamin, my boy, you've made us all proud. It's not every day we have a local hero working for us." Benjamin put his head down in a modest way. "I'm no hero, Mr. Jackson. I just want to keep doing my best, both here and at school." Benjamin couldn't help but be thankful for the chance Mr. Vlad had given him. As he went about his work, carrying papers and helping with office work, he was determined to earn the award, not just for Mr. Vlad's sake, but also for his own future and the things his mother had done for him. Benjamin kept coming back to Mr. Vlad's big old house over the course of a few weeks. At first, he only came by once in a while, but soon it became a normal part of his schedule. Benjamin would walk up the twisting path to Mr. Vlad's front door every Tuesday and Thursday after working at the newspaper company. Benjamin would happily say, "Good afternoon, Mr. Vlad," as he knocked. "Is there something I can do today to help?" At first, Mr. Vlad liked having people come over, even though he used to be very private. He would smile at Benjamin and crinkle his eyes when he saw him. "Son, come on in. Around here, there's always something to do." They worked on small housework projects together. Benjamin trimmed the lawn, which helped control the wild grass that had taken over the yard that had been well kept. He swept the porch, cleaned out the gutters, and even helped Mr. Vlad put together old photos that had been lying around in the attic collecting dust. Mr. Vlad started to open up as they worked together. He told Benjamin stories from when he was younger that were full of excitement and hard work. Benjamin knew every word of them. Benjamin then talked about his hopes and goals for the future. He wants to be a reporter one day. With a pat on the back, Mr. Vlad would say, "You've got a good head on your shoulders, Benjamin. And a good heart to go with it. I promise you that you will do well in life." Benjamin really needed these words of support. And he was just as excited about their time together as Mr. Vlad was. It used to be that the old man's house meant he was alone. But now it was full of laughter and friendly talk. Benjamin understood that Mr. Vlad was more than just a scholarship for him. He was a mentor, a friend, and maybe even the grandfather figure he had never had. Having Benjamin around gave Mr. Vlad a new sense of purpose and joy in his later years. Benjamin was helping Mr. Vlad go through old boxes in the attic one sunny afternoon when the old man stopped and held a faded picture in his shaking hands. As he looked at the picture, his eyes got blurry. "Come here, Benjamin, my boy," Mr. Vlad said, in a soft voice. "Let me show you something." Benjamin put down the dirty book he was reading and went over to Mr. Vlad. The picture showed Mr. Vlad with a beautiful woman when he was much younger. They were both smiling big, and their eyes were sparkling with happiness. Mr. Vlad said in a deep, emotional voice, "That's my Elizabeth. Before she died, we were married for 47 wonderful years." Benjamin paid close attention as Mr. Vlad began to tell Elizabeth stories from his life. It was about their first date, their wedding day, and the fun things they'd done together. The lonely look on his face seemed to fade as he talked, and a longing smile took its place. Mr. Vlad pulled out another picture and said, "We had 2 children. There was a family around a Christmas tree in this one. Both of them have moved abroad with their families. I now have 5 grandkids, but I don't see them very often." Benjamin felt terrible when he thought about how lonely Mr. Vlad must have been for all those years. It used to be funny and full of love, but now the big house was just a quiet memory of what he'd lost. Benjamin softly said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Vlad," and put his hand on the old man's shoulder to comfort him. Mr. Vlad looked up at Benjamin with tears still in his eyes. "When you come to visit, Benjamin, it means more to me than you know. This old house has new life because of you." Benjamin had a new view of Mr. Vlad at that point. He was more than just the rich man who gave him the scholarship. He was a friend, a teacher, and someone who had lived a long life and had a lot of good advice to give. Benjamin said, "Mr. Vlad, I'm glad I can be here for you. I like spending time with you too." Mr. Vlad smiled and shook Benjamin's hand. "Benjamin, you're a good boy. You make me think of my child. It makes this old house feel like home again when you're here. Sometimes I wish they were all here." And as the days turned into weeks, Benjamin spent more and more time at Mr. Vlad's house. Because they worked together, the garden that had been ignored for a while started to grow lush grass and bright flowers. Benjamin's hands used to be soft from schoolwork, but now they have calluses from digging and cutting back trees that are getting in the way. He stopped to wipe his forehead as they worked together in the backyard one hot afternoon. "Benjamin, you know," he said in a friendly voice, "there's something special about seeing things grow. It teaches you to be kind and patient." As Benjamin looked around at the plants that were doing well, he nodded. He felt proud. He said, "I never thought I'd enjoy gardening so much." Mr. Vlad laughed. "That's just how life is. The things we least expect can bring us the most happiness." Mr. Vlad told them stories from his past while they worked. He told Benjamin about his first job, which was as a paperboy, which is a lot like Benjamin's present job at the newspaper company. "As you do now," Mr. Vlad said, "it taught me the value of hard work and responsibility." Benjamin paid close attention and took in every word of advice. Putting down seeds, watering flowers, and even running errands for Mr. Vlad, he realized, were all simple things that were teaching him a lot more than any book could. When Mr. Vlad and Benjamin were done planting one day, he looked at Benjamin with a smile. You know, boy, there's a saying. The best fertilizer is the gardener's shadow. It means that being present and paying attention is the most important thing for growth. Benjamin gave this some thought. Like how you're teaching me by letting me help you? Mr. Vlad gave a warm smile. That's right, and you're teaching me too, Benjamin. You show this old man how to enjoy the little things in life. Benjamin was very happy as he walked home that night. He felt good after a hard day's work, and he understood that helping Mr. Vlad was more than just a way to say thank you. It was now something that made him happy and fulfilled on its own. Benjamin began to notice small changes in Mr. Vlad's behavior as the weeks went by. Old man, who used to stay to himself, seemed a little bigger, and his eyes looked brighter and more alert. Benjamin felt proud because he knew that the time they spent together was making a difference. Benjamin went to Mr. Vlad's house on a sunny Saturday morning for their normal gardening session. But the older man was dressed in a smart casual outfit instead of his gardening clothes. Benjamin, my boy, I heard you, Mr. Vlad, and a smile spread across his face. I hope it's okay, but I think today we should do something different. Benjamin was now interested. I agree, Mr. Vlad. What were you thinking? Well, Mr. Vlad began, his voice a little pumped up, I heard there's a community fair today in the park. We could go check it out. Benjamin's eyes got really big in shock. He had known Mr. Vlad for a long time, but the older men had never been interested in neighborhood events. That sounds great, Benjamin replied with excitement. As they walked to the park, Benjamin couldn't help but notice how Mr. Vlad was greeting neighbors and making small talk with people he hadn't talked to before. The different booths and events at the fair made Mr. Vlad's eyes light up. He even stopped to talk to the event's managers and asked them what the event was for. But, Benjamin, Mr. Vlad said, with some thought, I feel like I'm seeing this town for the first time, even though I've lived here for decades. There is a lot of life and community feeling here. Benjamin nodded, and he could feel a warmth going through his chest. Mr. Vlad, it's never too late to join in. Over the next few weeks, Benjamin saw that Mr. Vlad was getting more involved in neighborhood issues. The older man started going to town council meetings and sharing his knowledge and ideas. He gave a lot of money to local groups and even worked as a volunteer at the community center. One time, Mr. Vlad looked at Benjamin with a smile in his eye as they worked in the yard. Hey, boy, I've been thinking. Over the years, this town has given me a lot. It's time I gave something back. Benjamin's friendship with Mr. Vlad kept getting better as the weeks went by. Going about their daily business together turned into more than just chores and errands. It turned into a deep, meaningful relationship that made both of their lives better. As they sipped hot cocoa on Mr. Vlad's porch one cool fall afternoon, Benjamin saw an older man with a faraway look in his eyes. Is everything okay with you, Mr. Vlad? He asked, his voice showing worry. Mr. Vlad gave a small smile. Giving my grandson Thomas some thought. You should know that he's about your age. Is from Europe and lives with his parents. Benjamin paid close attention as Mr. Vlad told stories about Thomas. As he spoke, his eyes sparkled with pride and a touch of sadness. Benjamin saw how much Mr. Vlad missed having family close by. With love in his voice, Mr. Vlad said, Sometimes you make me think of him. Everyone here is so nice and eager to learn. It's like having a member of my family here with me. Benjamin could feel a lump in his throat. Mr. Vlad, I'm glad I can help you. You're like a grandfather to me now. Mr. Vlad's eyes got cloudy. And you, are now my grandson, but I don't get to see him very often. Thank you so much for that. From that day on, their relationship grew even stronger. Benjamin started to talk more about himself, including his hopes, fears, and dreams for the future. Mr. Vlad listened carefully and had wise and encouraging things to say. Mr. Vlad then talked about his own life. When he was younger, things were easier. He told Benjamin about his path to business success and the good and bad things that happened along the way. Benjamin paid close attention to every word and loved getting to know Mr. Vlad's life. They became closer as they talked about their own experiences and stories. Benjamin looked forward to their time together, not just because he knew he would learn something, but also because he would enjoy being with them. Mr. Vlad's eyes lit up with interest and love as they talked, making him seem to come to life as well. As Benjamin balanced his schoolwork, his part-time job at the local newspaper, and his frequent visits to Mr. Vlad, his routine fell into a smooth groove. Benjamin never wavered in his dedication to any of these important parts of his life, even though he had a lot going on. Benjamin continued to amaze his co-workers at the newspaper company with how hard he worked. He worked hard at both school and his part-time job to sort and bundle newspapers, so they would be ready for delivery every morning. Benjamin's boss, Mrs. Thompson, often told him how reliable and careful he was with details. "One of our best workers, Benjamin," Mrs. Thompson told him one afternoon, as she tapped him on the shoulder. "You're a blessing to us." Benjamin was very proud of what she said, and he felt good about the work he had done. He was proud to help his family with money because he knew that every dollar he made brought him closer to his goals. Benjamin would often go to Mr. Vlad's house after working at the newspaper. The familiar door would ring, and he would be ready to spend time with his older friend. His backpack would still be on his shoulder. He always got a warm smile from Mr. Vlad. "Benjamin, how was work today? What was the boys' day like?" he'd ask him. Benjamin would talk about his job, telling funny stories about newspapers that got lost or how satisfying it was to see the nicely stacked bundles ready to be delivered. Mr. Vlad listened carefully, then offered words of support, and sometimes talked about his own work experiences. Benjamin did different things around the house to help Mr. Vlad while they were together. They would sometimes work in the yard, planting flowers or cutting back bushes, and other times they would fix things around the house. Benjamin took in Mr. Vlad's advice and learned from it all. Benjamin never forgot about his other duties, even though he spent more time with Mr. Vlad. He worked hard on his homework and would often study at Mr. Vlad's dining room table, while the older man read nearby. Benjamin kept getting good grades, and his teachers kept telling him how much they appreciated his hard work and devotion. Benjamin's trips to Mr. Vlad's house became more than just a habit as the weeks went by. They became the best part of his week. The little boy looked forward to these times, excitedly expecting Mr. Vlad's stories and words of wisdom. As they sipped lemonade on the porch one sunny afternoon, Benjamin realized how much these visits meant to him. Mr. Vlad was telling a story about when he was younger, and his eyes were sparkling with pleasure and longing. Benjamin paid close attention and hung on every word. "Benjamin," Mr. Vlad said, in a soft, warm voice, "I'm so glad you found my wallet that day. It's brought me back so much more than just my money." Benjamin could feel a lump in his throat. He just nodded and couldn't say anything for a moment. He finally spoke up and said, "I'm glad too, Mr. Vlad. I never thought that returning a wallet could lead to this." He put his hand on Benjamin's and patted it. "This friendship we've built, it's worth more than any amount of money in that wallet or any scholarship fund." Benjamin's eyes lit up when the grant was brought up. He had almost forgotten about it because he was so happy to be with Mr. Vlad. He realized at that moment that the grant, while very kind and important for his future, wasn't the best thing that this relationship had given him. Benjamin said in a soft voice, "You're right. I've learned so much from you, Mr. Vlad, about life, about kindness, about what really matters. That's worth more than any scholarship." Mr. Vlad felt tears in his eyes and squeezed Benjamin's hand. "You've taught me a thing or two as well, young man. You've reminded this old caregiver what it's like to have hope and to see the world through fresh eyes." Benjamin felt very happy as they sat there in silence and watched the sun go down. He understood that in Mr. Vlad, he had found more than just a helper. He had also found a true friend and teacher. What were the real treasures? The lessons he was learning, the stories he was hearing, and the connections he was making. Benjamin was about to start a new part of his life, as summer came to an end. He got into the well-known Oakwood High School, in large part because of Mr. Vlad's grant. Benjamin's hands were shaking as he opened the thick package that held the news. He whispered, "I got in." His eyes were wide with shock. Mrs. Jackson gave her son a tight hug as tears of happiness ran down her face. "Oh, Benjamin, I'm so proud of you." Benjamin's first thought was to tell Mr. Vlad the news. He ran to the old man's house as fast as he could, his heart racing. Benjamin couldn't hold it together when Mr. Vlad opened the door. He showed Mr. Vlad the acceptance letter and said, "Mr. Vlad, I got accepted to Oakwood High." A friendly smile spread across Mr. Vlad's face. "Well, now, that's wonderful news, my boy. Come in, come in. We must celebrate." As they sat in Mr. Vlad's study, Benjamin's original excitement gave way to a steady worry. It began to hit them that they really were going to such an elite school. He moved the letter around and tensed up. "What's troubling you, Benjamin?" When Mr. Vlad saw that the boy's mood had changed, he asked. Benjamin paused before he spoke. "What can I say? Oakwood is such a fancy place. What if I don't belong? What if I can't follow the other kids?" He leaned forward, and Mr. Vlad's eyes were kind but firm. "Listen up, Benjamin. You've worked hard to get into that school. Without my support, you would not have been able to do what you did." Benjamin said yes, but his eyes still showed worry. Mr. Vlad went on, "I have full faith in your ability to succeed," using a soft but firm tone of voice. "Young man Benjamin, you are smart, work hard, and have a good heart. No matter where you go, those traits will take you far." "But what if I need help?" Benjamin asked in a low voice. He put his hand on Benjamin's and patted it. "Benjamin, I'll be here for you the whole time. The grant isn't the only thing I can do to help. I'm here for you no matter what." Benjamin felt calm and happy all at once. He didn't have to go on this new trip by himself. His mom and Mr. Vlad were with him. He felt ready to take on any tasks Oakwood High might throw at him, because they were there for him. When Benjamin's first day of Oakwood High School came around, he was both excited and worried. He stood in front of the mirror and pulled his new outfit, which felt stiff and strange, into place. Mrs. Jackson helped him tie his tie, and her eyes lit up with joy. She said, "You look so grown up, Benjamin," but her voice was a little shaky. Benjamin smiled with worry on his face. "Thanks, Mom. I hope I'm ready." Benjamin felt like he couldn't handle everything. When he walked into Oakwood High, there were lots of students in the hallways, and they all seemed to be very sure of themselves and sophisticated. Benjamin tightened his grip on his backpack. He didn't feel at home in this big building with its shiny floors and fancy architecture. In Benjamin's first class, Advanced Literature, all of his peers talked very well about books he had never heard of. He fell further back in his seat as the minutes went by. He was feeling more and more lost. Benjamin was having a hard time keeping up with his tough schoolwork. As the days went by, every night, he spent hours reading through textbooks to try to understand ideas that his classmates seemed to understand easily. His workload was much heavier than anything he had ever seen before, and he often had to stay up late to finish his tasks. During lunch breaks, Benjamin sat alone and watched as other students got together with their friends to talk about plans for the weekend at country clubs or planned trips to faraway places. Being very aware of how different his background was from that of his friends made him feel like he didn't belong. Benjamin wouldn't give up, even with all of these problems. He thought about Mr. Vlad's words of support and got strength from them. Benjamin started to go to the library more often and asked teachers for help during their office hours. He also started to push himself to do better. It was late at night, and Benjamin was sitting at his desk with a lot of books and papers all around him. Mrs. Jackson gently knocked on his door. "Benjamin, honey, it's getting late. You should get some rest," she told him, her voice full of worry. Benjamin raised his eyes tired but determined. "No, Mom, I have to finish this article and study for the math test tomorrow." Mrs. Jackson sat down next to him and put her hand on his shoulder to make him feel better. "Benjamin, I'm so proud of how hard you're working. But don't forget that you worked hard to get into this school. Do not doubt yourself." Her words gave Benjamin a new drive to do things. He gave her a nod, thankful for her help. "Thanks, Mom. I'm not going to give up. You and Mr. Vlad will be proud of me." Benjamin got back to studying with a renewed sense of determination, ready to take on any difficulties that Oakwood High had in store. As the weekends approached, Benjamin looked forward to going to Mr. Vlad's house with great excitement. The big house that scared Benjamin before now felt like a safe place, where he could get away from the stress of his new school life. Benjamin climbed the curving path to Mr. Vlad's front door on a cool Saturday morning. The old man smiled at him and looked at him with eyes that were full of love. "Benjamin, my boy, come in, Mr. Vlad told him as he led him inside. As soon as they were in the cozy study, Benjamin felt like the stress of the past week was lifted. His voice was tinged with anger and self-doubt as he talked about his problems at Oakwood High. Mr. Vlad paid close attention and nodded to show that he understood. The old man leaned forward in his chair and looked at Benjamin with a steady, comforting gaze. When Benjamin was done, his voice was soft but strong as he spoke. "Remember, Benjamin, your goal at that school is not to become like everyone else. Your goal is to learn and grow while staying true to who you are." Benjamin took in what Mr. Vlad said and nodded. "The values that got you here, your honesty, your work ethic, your kindness, those are what truly matter," he said. "Don't lose sight of that, no matter how challenging things get." As they talked, Benjamin felt calm come over him. In his talk, Mr. Vlad talked about hard times in his own life, and how he overcame them by keeping true to his beliefs. Benjamin's weekend visits became his anchor, keeping him steady in the rough waters of his new school life. Benjamin not only felt better when he was with Mr. Vlad, but he also got the advice and knowledge he needed to deal with his problems. Benjamin started to get into a groove at Oakwood High as the weeks went by. His early problems turned into small wins, and he began to feel more at ease in the busy halls and tough classrooms. Benjamin saw a new student sitting alone one day at lunch. He went up to the boy right away and introduced himself. "Hi, my name is Benjamin. Do you mind if I join you?" One of the new students, Alex, smiled happily. "Thanks, that sounds good to me." People noticed Benjamin's small act of kindness. Soon, Benjamin's peers saw him in a new light. They admired how friendly he was and how willing he was to help others, even though he was working hard to keep up with his schoolwork. Benjamin's English teacher gave them a group project to do. He was shocked when several of his friends asked to work with him. "Someone in the class who is really good at school told me, 'We'd love to have you in our group. Your thoughts are always so interesting.'" Benjamin's chest felt warm. He was finally feeling like he belonged. As Benjamin's confidence grew at school, his relationship with Mr. Vlad got stronger during their visits on the weekends. Benjamin was excited to talk about his adventures and small wins. One afternoon, Mr. Vlad told his son, "I'm so proud of you, my boy." His eyes were sparkling with pride. "It's clear that your kindness and hard work pay off." Benjamin was thrilled to hear the compliment. "Mr. Vlad, I couldn't have done it without your help. I learned a lot from you." Mr. Vlad laughed and slapped Benjamin on the hand. "Benjamin, you had it in you the whole time. I only helped you see it." Benjamin realized how far he'd come as they sat there and laughed and told stories. He wasn't as scared as he was when he first came to Oakwood High. Together with Mr. Vlad's help and his own hard work, Benjamin was changing into the person he had always wanted to be. The changes in the seasons made Mr. Vlad's age stand out more. He walked a little more slowly, and when he poured his morning tea, his hands shook a little. Even with these small signs of aging, Mr. Vlad was still very busy and full of life. Benjamin volunteered to do more around the house now that he understood Mr. Vlad's needs better. By cutting the grass every weekend, he made sure that the grand house kept its royal look. Every Saturday, Benjamin would get there early with gardening gloves and a focused look on his face. Benjamin said one sunny morning, "Mr. Vlad, I think we should plant some new flowers in the front garden today. How about some bright yellow daffodils?" He got very excited when he thought of it. "That sounds great, my boy. My lovely wife loved the color yellow." Benjamin paid close attention as Mr. Vlad talked about his late wife while they worked together in the yard. The old man's voice was full of love and warmth as he talked about the fun times they had together. Benjamin was also in charge of taking care of Mr. Vlad's huge library. As Mr. Vlad carefully dusted each book, he would talk about his favorite authors and the places he had been. As they sat in the study one afternoon, Mr. Vlad told Benjamin, "You know, I never thought I'd enjoy company this much again. You've made my life interesting again." Benjamin could feel a lump in his throat. "Mr. Vlad, you did the same for me. You've taught me a lot." Each day that went by, their friendship grew stronger. They played chess for hours, and Mr. Vlad taught Benjamin the finer points of strategy slowly and carefully. They would sit by the fireplace and tell stories and dream about the past. When it rained, Benjamin was taught by Mr. Vlad how to make some of his favorite foods. Before, the old man felt lonely in the kitchen. Now, it was full of laughter and the sound of pots and pans clattering. Mr. Vlad laughed as Benjamin happily showed off a perfectly baked apple pie and said, "You're becoming quite the chef." Benjamin was very proud. "My teacher was great." Benjamin noticed that his time with Mr. Vlad had become the best part of his week. As their friendship grew, the old man's kindness and knowledge had become an important part of his life and helped him get through the tough parts of school and being a teenager. When spring came, Mr. Vlad and Benjamin stood at the edge of the yard, which used to be beautiful but was now overgrown and not being cared for. Mr. Vlad let out a sigh, and memories made his eyes misty. He said, in a soft voice, "You know, Benjamin, this garden used to be my wife's pride and joy. I think I've forgotten about it for a few years now." Benjamin saw the sadness in Mr. Vlad's eyes when he looked up at him. He asked, "Why don't we fix it up together?" His voice was full of excitement. "We could make it look nice again." The thought made Mr. Vlad's face light up. "That's a great idea, my boy. It would be nice to see it bloom again." That was the start of their new project. Benjamin would always get there early on the weekends, ready to work in the yard. They started by pulling out the weeds and growing bushes. They worked hard in the dirt. Benjamin learned about different plants and flowers from Mr. Vlad, who told stories about each one as they worked. He would carefully prune a bush and say, "These roses here were my wife's favorites." Every day, she took care of them. Benjamin paid close attention and took in every word and lesson. Because they had to wait for seeds to grow and flowers to bloom, he learned how important it is to be patient. He learned how to take care of delicate flowers and tough plants from Mr. Vlad. The yard slowly changed over the course of the weeks. Colorful flowers began to show through the ground, and the trees that were once wild began to take on neat, shaped forms. Benjamin was proud every time he saw a new flower or bud open. Benjamin once wiped his sweaty forehead and said, "It's amazing how much work goes into a garden." With a soft smile on his face, Mr. Vlad yesed. "Yes, but that's what makes it so fun. When you work hard, nature gives you beauty in return." Their time in the yard turned into more than just work. It became a time to bond, talk, and share stories. Benjamin talked to Mr. Vlad about his problems at school and his hopes for the future, while being honest with him. In return, Mr. Vlad shared what he had learned over the course of his long life, and offered support and advice. The garden burst into full bloom as spring turned into summer. Roses grew up, trellises, daisies swayed in the wind, and butterflies flew through the flowers. One day, Mr. Vlad and Benjamin took a step back and looked at what they had done. "We did it," Benjamin said, with awe in his voice. "How lovely." Mr. Vlad put his hand on Benjamin's back, and his eyes lit up with love and pride. "Yes, my son, we did. It's even more beautiful because we did it together." Benjamin and Mr. Vlad's friendship grew stronger as they took care of the yard. The deserted area had turned into a lively haven, just like their relationship had grown. Benjamin looked forward to their weekend gardening sessions more and more. And it wasn't just because he liked taking care of the plants. He also liked being with Mr. Vlad. Following a long day at work, Mr. Vlad smiled at Benjamin as they sipped lemonade on the porch on a sunny Saturday. "You know what, my boy, I never thought I'd enjoy gardening again. But now that you're here, it's the best part of my week." Benjamin's chest felt warm. "I agree with Mr. Vlad. It's great to learn from you and hear your stories." As the weeks went by, they talked more deeply. As Benjamin talked about his dreams and fears about school, Mr. Vlad listened with the love and patience of a grandfather. In response, Mr. Vlad talked about his own life and shared the wisdom he had learned over the years. Benjamin wanted to tell Mr. Vlad, the first person after his mother, that he did great on a very hard test. He was so excited that he ran to the old man's house. "I did it, Mr. Vlad. It was a great chemistry test. I got an A," Benjamin yelled, with a proud look on his face. His eyes lit up with happiness. "That's great, Benjamin. You've been working so hard, so I knew you could do it." It surprised both of them when he pulled Benjamin into a warm hug. Benjamin could feel tears starting to form at the edges of his eyes as they pulled away. Not only was he proud of how well he did in school, but he also felt like he had found a home in Mr. Vlad. Mr. Vlad seemed to understand how Benjamin felt. He said in a soft voice, "You know, Benjamin, I may not have any grandchildren nearby, but you're like a grandson to me now. Not only am I proud of your grades, but also of the great young man you're turning into." Benjamin took a deep breath as Mr. What Vlad said. "Say thanks to Mr. Vlad. I see you as family too." After that, they became even closer. They were happy for each other's wins, no matter how big or small. Benjamin was there to taste test and cheer when Mr. Vlad got good at a new recipe. Benjamin won a writing contest at school, and Mr. Vlad demanded that the story be framed and hung in his study. As the weeks went by, Mrs. Jackson couldn't help but notice how Benjamin had changed for the better. It looked like her son was happy, more sure of himself, and more focused than ever. She knew that Mr. Vlad's impact had a big part in making this happen. One night, Mrs. Jackson made a choice while Benjamin talked excitedly about his most recent visit with Mr. Vlad over dinner. "Benjamin, why don't we have Mr. Vlad over for dinner next week?" she asked, with a warm smile. Benjamin's eyes got really bright. "Really, Mom? Wow, that would be great." On the following Saturday, Mr. Vlad showed up at the Jackson's simple house with a bouquet of flowers from his yard. Mrs. Jackson greeted him warmly, and the kind act made her feel good. When they sat down to dinner, the room was warm and full of laughing. Mr. Vlad told them stories from his childhood, and Benjamin talked about the most recent things he had done well in school. Mrs. Jackson was happy to see how much love there was between them as she watched them engage. After dinner, Mrs. Jackson told Mr. Vlad, "We'd love to have you join us for dinner more often." They then ate homemade apple pie. "You're always welcome to stay with us." Mr. Vlad's eyes were filled with sadness. "I'm not sure what to say." "Sweetheart, thank you. I really appreciate that," Since then, Mr. Vlad has been coming to the Jackson family dinners every week. What began as once a week quickly turned into twice, or even 3 times a week. The old man, who had been alone, suddenly felt loved and cared for in a way that he hadn't felt in years. Over the course of several months, Mr. Vlad's mood changed significantly. The rough appearance went away, and in its place was a soft, grandfatherly presence. He began to talk more freely, telling Benjamin and Mrs. Jackson stories about his late wife and his own youth. Benjamin and Mr. Vlad's relationship grew stronger as the seasons changed. The bond between them grew stronger every day and became an important part of both of their lives. Benjamin went to Mr. Vlad's house on a sunny Saturday morning, excited to start the day with him. He yelled, "Mr. Vlad," with joy, "Are you equipped for the neighborhood fair?" This morning, Mr. Vlad came out of his house with a big smile on his face. "Yes, I am, my boy. Let's go make people happy, shall we?" The two of them went to the park together, where the fair was going on. There was laughter and the smell of cotton candy in the air. Benjamin and Mr. Vlad walked together and enjoyed the sounds and sights. They went to a booth that was looking for people to help run games. Benjamin and Mr. Vlad both rolled up their sleeves and got to work right away. Benjamin ran the ring toss game while Mr. Vlad gave the kids their gifts. Benjamin couldn't help but notice how happy Mr. Vlad was as they worked. The man who used to keep to himself could now easily talk to strangers, and his eyes were beaming with happiness. They went to Benjamin's house for dinner after the fair. Mrs. Jackson met them warmly, and the air was filled with the smell of her famous pot roast. As they ate, she asked, "How was the fair for you two?" "Mrs. Jackson, it was great." The answer came from Mr. Vlad, who was very excited. "I haven't had this much fun in a long time." Benjamin agreed and nodded. "Mr. Vlad, we should help out more often. Helping out made me feel great." As they ate together, they laughed and talked all the time. While Benjamin talked about his plans for the next school year, Mr. Vlad told them stories from his childhood. These times spent together had become normal, and they brought Benjamin and Mr. Vlad a lot of happiness and satisfaction. They were no longer friends because of age or situation, but because of a special bond between them. Benjamin couldn't help but be amazed at how much his life had changed since the day he found Mr. Vlad's wallet. He was trying to fix his graduation cap in front of the mirror. The years had gone by so quickly, with lots of times of growth, difficulty, and happiness. His mind went back to his first day at the fancy high school, when he felt lost and confused. He was about to finish with honors. "Are you ready, Benjamin?" The call came from Mrs. Jackson downstairs. "Mr. Vlad is on his way and will be here soon." Benjamin took a big breath and went down the stairs. There was a knock at the door as he got to the bottom step. When Mrs. Jackson opened it, she saw Mr. Vlad standing there in a suit, carrying a small gift box. "There's our class graduate." "What?" Mr. Vlad yelled, his eyes shining with joy. Benjamin was pulled into a warm hug by him. "I can't believe today has finally come." Benjamin could feel a lump in his throat. He spoke in a soft voice, "I couldn't have done it without you, Mr. Vlad." Benjamin's thought went to all the good times he had had with Mr. Vlad over the years. Like fixing up the garden together, having long conversations on the porch, and having family dinners. All of these things made Benjamin the person he was now. After sitting in the theater and waiting for his name to be called, Benjamin felt ready. He was sure that he had the tools to handle any problems that came his way. He had the courage to follow his dreams thanks to Mr. Vlad's advice and his mother's loyal support. Benjamin looked over at Mr. Vlad, who was sitting next to Mrs. Jackson, and was smiling with pride. When they looked at each other, Benjamin felt a rush of thanks for the strong family bond they had made. After his name was called, Benjamin walked across the stage with his head held high. There were cheers from everyone in the hall, but Mr. Vlad and Mrs. Jackson's were the loudest. When Benjamin picked up his diploma, the result of years of hard work and commitment, they were filled with pride. Benjamin felt pulled to Mr. Vlad after the ceremony, when everyone was happy and giving hugs. With a smile in his eye, Mr. Vlad said, "Let's go to the garden." They went to Mr. Vlad's house, where the garden that had been ignored for a while was now full of bright colors and sweet smells. The way the garden changed over the years showed how their relationship had grown. He turned to Benjamin as they sat on the bench they had built together many years ago. His eyes were misty. With a heavy heart, he said, "Benjamin, my boy, I'm so proud of you, you should know that." Benjamin smiled, but he could feel a lump in his throat. "Say thanks to Mr. Vlad. You made it possible for me to finish." Mr. Vlad gave a small shake of his head. "It's not just about how well you did in school, though that is impressive. The kind, thoughtful young man you've become is what makes me really proud." The yard was in front of them, he said. "Benjamin, you've grown like these flowers. You've dealt with problems with ease and strength. You were kind to other people, even when it wasn't easy, and that made my life so much better." Mr. Vlad went on, and Benjamin could feel tears coming to his eyes. "You didn't just give me my money back when you found my wallet that day. You gave me something much more valuable, a friendship that has made my life so much better." When Benjamin heard Mr. Vlad's touching words, he felt something wash over him. Before speaking, he took a deep breath and tried to settle his voice. Benjamin began, "Mr. Vlad, I can't thank you enough for everything you've done for me." His eyes were filled with thanks. "Your love, support, and advice have meant more to me than words can say." Benjamin stopped and took a moment to enjoy the lovely yard that they had worked on together. "Without you, I wouldn't be where I am now. Not just about farming or school, but also about life, being kind, and what it means to be a good person. Thank you so much." Mr. Vlad gave Benjamin a warm smile and put a soft hand on his shoulder. He pointed to the path that wound through the yard and asked, "Shall we go for a walk?" As they walked along together, Benjamin said, "I want you to know that our bond will always be strong no matter where life takes me. Mr. Vlad, you're not just my teacher, you're family." Mr. Vlad nodded, and his eyes were still wet with tears. "And you, my son, are my lost grandson. I'm so thankful that you found that wallet all those years ago." They took a moment to enjoy the peace and quiet of the walk and the beauty of the flowers around them. The garden, which had been ignored and lifeless, was now full of bright colors and sweet smells. A live reminder of how close they were and how much they worked together. Benjamin said in a soft voice, "You know, this garden makes me think of our relationship. We began with small things, like a lost wallet and an empty plot of land, and now look what we've grown." Mr. Vlad laughed, and a smile lit up his face. "Yes, Benjamin, no matter the season, our friendship will grow strong just like this garden." Would you still return a wallet if you were in a tough situation? Yes or no? Let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to my channel. I am spending hours upon hours writing these heartwarming stories for you. And your support is what keeps me going.